Okay, Dave Staublin back. We are continuing on with how do we collect data. Well, it turns out there's a bunch of different ways. The first way is called an observational study. And what we do is we observe or look at individuals and we measure variables, but here's the key thing: we do not attempt to influence the response. So, for example, we might observe students going through the lunchroom line to see which items they select to eat. And we would strictly observe, we would not attempt to influence them by saying something like, "Are you sure you don't want some fries?" No, we would remain completely quiet and strictly observe. Now, there is a further observational study called a comparative observational study. And in this case, it is the same as above, except we observe and compare two different groups. So, for example, we could do a comparative observational study of the lunchroom line, and we could observe the types of food that, say, varsity athletes choose versus non-varsity athletes to see if there's a difference in their healthful eating. Okay, so there's observational studies. The next is a sample survey. And in this case, we learn about a population by examining a sample. And we do that using some sort of survey. Now, there are different types of these. The first is a voluntary response survey. And in this case, those who are interested respond to the survey. So, for example, you could pass out a survey to people in the lunch line and say, if you are interested, fill out the survey and turn it in. And in this case, the individual chooses to participate. The next type is called a convenience sample survey. And in this case, you investigate individuals who are easiest to reach. So, for example, you could stand by the lunch line and ask the people that walk by you. Those would be a convenience. The next type is a simple random survey, and in this case you select your individuals randomly using probability, like a random number generator. Then we have the stratified random survey, and this is where we divide individuals into groups and select individuals randomly from each group, and lastly we have cluster sampling, where we select random groups that have been chosen due to proximity. Okay, there are additional, even more ways to collect data. And so the next way is experimental, or experiment. And in this case, an experiment is when we deliberately, this is a word that means on purpose. So we on purpose impose a treatment on individuals to observe their response. So the question we're asking is, does the treatment cause a change? Now, when we do any of these things, we are interested in a thing called the scope of inference. And this means the population to which our results can be applied. So, for example, if we did an experiment with a smart pill on high school students and found that it worked, our scope of inference would be high school students throughout the nation. Our scope of inference would not include adults because we didn't do the experiment on adults, even though there might be a question that if it works on young people, it should work on old people. But the scope of inference is really about making a judgment. When you did the experiment, how can those results be applied to other people? Then the next thing is called causal inference. And this is when you draw a conclusion based on your results from an experiment or a survey or an observational study. I'm going to end this video here, and we'll continue in part 3.